What if mistakes weren't just private regrets, but public lessons that echoed for generations? Imagine living in a world where justice wasn't hidden in courtrooms, but shouted from mountaintops, where ritual, fear, and spectacle ruled, and the consequences of defiance shaped your destiny. Ancient punishments in the Bible weren't simply about retribution. They were society's way of drawing a line in the sand, forging a people, and revealing the deep seriousness of choices. Today, we count down the top 10 ancient punishments in the Bible. Stories that send chills down the spine, demand reflection, and reveal the high stakes of living by divine decree.
Number 10. Stoning, the ultimate public sentence. No punishment in biblical times was more infamous or more terrifying than stoning. Reserved for what the community saw as the gravest crimes: blasphemy, idolatry, breaking the Sabbath, adultery in some cases. Stoning wasn't a secret execution, but a public demonstration. The accused would be surrounded by witnesses, and often the whole town. The first stones were thrown by the accusers themselves, focusing guilt and responsibility, and then the crowd joined in, amplifying shame and serving as a warning. The ordeal was brutal and final, a reminder that rebellion against God's law or the fracture of community trust was not taken lightly. But even in its harshness, this punishment underscored the value of fidelity to the commandments and set clear boundaries meant to protect society from chaos.
Number 9. Exile, banished from home and land. For many Israelites, home was sacred, so to lose it was a punishment almost worse than death. Exile wasn't only a penalty for individuals. Cain was made a restless wanderer for killing his brother, but it also befell entire peoples or tribes. Israel itself was twice swept into mass exile, first to Assyria, later to Babylon, for repeated idolatry and injustice. Families were uprooted, cities emptied, memories lost. Life as an exile meant facing foreign gods, strange laws, and perpetual reminders that a broken covenant had devastating ripple effects. Yet even in the pain of exile, the Bible often leaves a crack of hope. God promises return and restoration for those willing to renew their hearts.
Number 8. Cities destroyed by fire, Sodom and Gomorrah. Sometimes entire cities bore the brunt of divine judgment. Sodom and Gomorrah, notorious for violence and corruption, were warned but did not change. Fire and brimstone rained down from heaven, erasing their legacy and leaving only desolate wasteland. Lot's escape and his wife's haunting transformation into a pillar of salt turned this episode into history's cautionary tale about unchecked evil. Ashes where life once bustled showed that some lines, once crossed, bring catastrophic consequences, not just for individuals, but for whole cultures that lose their moral compass.
Number 7. Leprosy, spiritual sickness with a social price. Not all punishment came by sword or flame. Leprosy in the Bible wasn't just a disease, it was seen as a living sentence brought on by disobedience or blasphemy, as in the story of Miriam, Moses' sister, or King Uzziah. Those afflicted were forced outside the camp, isolated, and required to signal their presence to others. Cut off from worship, family, and daily life, they became physical reminders of spiritual consequences, walking warnings to respect God's holiness. But leprosy also left room for healing, as episodes with Naaman and others showed that humility and obedience could still restore what was lost.
Number 6. Cutting off hands, crime and its cost. The law sometimes took a literal, irreversible turn. Deuteronomy 25 specifies that a woman who intervenes in a fight by grabbing a man's private parts is to have her hand cut off. Show her no pity.
Though shocking to modern readers, this sentence was meant to shock its original hearers as well. In a world where the law was life and every body part was needed for survival, the loss of a hand meant lasting disability, loss of livelihood, and visible shame. The punishment was designed to deter, inflict dishonor, and show that the violation of order had real bodily consequences.
Number 5. Lifelong banishment, endless consequence. Some offenders became outcasts for life. Murderers, false prophets, and certain sexual offenders were marked for perpetual exclusion. Cain bore a mark so that, though banished, he wouldn't be killed by others, a fate worse than death in a tribal world where isolation meant constant danger and loneliness. Others, like lepers, experienced banishment that lasted as long as their condition. A community's willingness to sever ties with a member stressed just how much one person's defiance could endanger the whole.
Number 4. King Nebuchadnezzar's humbling, beasts, and madness. Even the mighty were not immune. Daniel 4 tells how the proud Babylonian emperor Nebuchadnezzar was stricken with madness as punishment for his arrogance and refusal to honor God. He was driven away from people, lived like an animal, ate grass, and let his hair and nails grow wild. Only after acknowledging the sovereignty of God did his mind return and his kingdom resume. Nebuchadnezzar's plight illustrated that power, unsupported by humility, is temporary, and that God can turn a throne into a pasture in a heartbeat. Number 3. Samson's downfall, the price of a broken vow. Not all judgment came from outside. Sometimes it was the fruit of broken promises. Samson, the strongest man in the Bible, was set apart from birth as a Nazirite, never to cut his hair, drink wine, or touch the dead. When he revealed his secret to Delilah, he was ambushed, blinded, imprisoned, and mocked. The Philistines' punishment for Samson was brutal, but at its root was his own failure to live by his calling. Even so, in his final moments, Samson cried out for strength and brought the enemy temple crashing down, his weakness turning to strength in surrender.
Number 2. National calamities, defeat, famine, and plagues. God's covenant with Israel included stern warnings. If the people turned to idolatry or injustice, the sky would turn to bronze, the ground to iron. Armies would be defeated, and famine would stalk the land. See Deuteronomy 28. Time and again, these curses became reality. Israel's defeat before Ai due to hidden sin. Drought lasting years under Ahab's reign. Plagues striking the Egyptians for defying Moses' call for freedom. These collective punishments were loud reminders that society's choices matter, and that ignoring justice and mercy has consequences far beyond the individual offender.
Number 1. Nations erased for idolatry and defiance. The ultimate sentence was visited not on individuals or even mere cities, but on whole nations. The Canaanites were driven out for their violence and pagan practices. Israel itself was scattered and merely erased twice for forsaking God and oppressing the vulnerable. Judgment wasn't reserved for outsiders. The chosen people themselves faced invasion, destruction of the temple, and centuries of rootlessness for failing to uphold justice and true worship. Each time, a remnant survived and hope glimmered for future restoration. The point was clear. No one, not even God's own people, could ignore the law of consequences. Ancient punishments in the Bible, as harsh as they seem through modern eyes, were more than blunt force. They were signposts written in flesh, stone, and fire, shouting to every generation that justice is serious, that choices shape destinies, and that mercy is only meaningful when measured against real standards. They forced entire communities to grapple with their beliefs, actions,
and the cost of letting wrongdoing spread unchecked. But behind every story of judgment was also the possibility of grace, a healing after leprosy, a return from exile, a kingdom restored to a humbled heart. Which punishment shocked you most? What lessons linger when justice is both terrifying and transformative? Share your reactions and thoughts below, and subscribe for more powerful journeys through history's most dramatic moments in Scripture.